I think it's very clear to everybody watching that the Iranian people have reached a breaking point. They are desperate. The bravery and the courage of some of the acts of protest that we've seen in past days coming out of Iran is just astounding. This is a bloodthirsty authoritarian regime which has shown no compunction whatsoever to use live fire and kill people in the streets whenever they protest. And yet, in recent days, we've seen protests led by women who are brave enough to remove their hijab, set them on fire in the street, wave them in front of, trucks with water cannon and armed police. And, these are signs of great bravery, but also great desperation. The Iranian people have had enough.
Do you think there could be a situation here where these sort of protests are stamped out and everything goes back to business as usual, or is it more of a tipping point?
Unfortunately, I think it's very plausible that as we've seen several times before, this cycle of protest will end with extreme repression and slowly, with more and more protesters being arrested and removed from the streets, this petering out. A lot of us would like to hope that this could be the spark that, sets the regime aflame in an irrevocable way. But, and I do think it will happen at some point. There really is this groundswell of rage and anger and just exasperation with this morally, financially corrupt regime, largely of elderly men, very religious, obviously, too, who don't reflect the rest of the population and who don't listen and are incapable of reforming themselves. So I do think that at some point we will see regime change in Iran because the public opinion is overwhelmingly against this regime now, including its traditional constituents, the religious, Muslim religious Shia supporters who were once behind this revolution in 1979. So I don't know if now is the moment, but I think the moment is coming. And if not now, it's only a matter of time.
I notice that the Iranian government is accusing foreign agents or unspecified terrorists of instigating some of this violence. Is there a chance that there may be some truth in that, people taking the opportunity to cause further disruption and detracting from the actual message here?
Oh, that's they always say that. I mean, I'm probably one of those foreign agents, to be honest. I mean, I've been convicted of being one. It's ludicrous. It's hilarious. This is clearly a grassroots Iranian-led movement. It's spontaneous. It erupted after the killing of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old young Kurdish woman who was simply walking about the streets dressed like 20 or 30% of the female population, which is, she's wearing a hijab, but it's further back on her head. You can see a bit of hair there, but she still is complying. And for that, she was arrested and murdered by the morality police. This is the reason for this spontaneous eruption of protest. And I think many people in Iran, including many men, have been in that position before. They've had interactions with the morality police and they could say, maybe it would have happened to me. It really hit close to home for so many of them. And this is an organic movement. There's absolutely no credence whatsoever in any Iranian propagandistic claims of foreign agents or anything like that.
Given the fraught negotiations, or rather the fraught relationship that the world has with Iran and the Iranian government, what do you think is the most feasible world response, global response to what's happening in Iran at the moment?
Well, it's interesting that the Iranian delegation, including the Iranian President Raisi, the Iranian Foreign Minister and others, are in New York right now for the UN General Assembly. They should be held to account for this. The fact that they would even go to New York at all, whilst, they're clearly unwelcome, many of them, including Raisi, are under international sanctions. Raisi himself is a war criminal. But they would leave their country, which is right now in flames, rather than, visiting the bereaved parents of Mahsa Amini. They would go to the UN to spout their propaganda and their vile hate speech, including Holocaust denial, which President Raisi reiterated only a couple of days ago in a 60 Minutes interview. It's quite shocking, really, and we need to hold them to account. There were calls for Raisi's visa not to be granted. That's really difficult diplomatically because of the UN, having to be accessed by all member States, but some members of his delegation could have easily had their visas not granted, and they're also sanctioned internationally. So the fact that you have this Iranian group in New York, I guess, is an opportunity to hold some of them to account for that. But also we should be supporting the Iranian people. The Iranian people don't want a JCPOA. The JCPOA nuclear negotiations are dead in the water. They're done and dusted. The Americans in particular need to look at a strategy or a plan B of actually supporting the Iranian people in their uprising and trying as best they can to effect regime change, because this Iranian regime isn't going to change otherwise, and no nuclear deal, unfortunately, is going to lead to that for the Iranian people.
You mentioned there the Iranian president being in New York for the United Nations. It's become public that you are among a group of people who have launched a civil suit against the Iranian government. Can you talk us through, first of all, what that suit is targeting and why you've decided that that's an appropriate course of action here?
So we're actually suing President Raisi himself personally under the US Victims of Torture statutes in the jurisdiction of New York, because that delegation led by Raisi is travelling to New York. So the hope is that we will be able to serve him with those papers during his visit. President Raisi was the head of the judiciary during my sham trial, my psychological and at times physical torture, and my conviction, the denial of my appeal. Throughout the legal, quote unquote, legal process of my trial in Iran, he was the head of the judiciary. So the buck stops with him in that sense. Therefore, he is responsible for all of the human rights abuses that I suffered through. A number of other Iranian plaintiffs are also on this case, and they also suffered torture and other rights abuses under, essentially under President Raisi. He is also widely considered to be a war criminal due to the killings of thousands of innocent political prisoners in 1988 when he was a judge on the so-called death commissions. And this is a really nasty character. It is a bit of a stunt in a way. I don't know whether or not the lawsuit will have any meaningful impact, but it is one means to try and call some sort of account for this man's horrendous crimes.